This is an interview for the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute's Oral History Project with Reverend Erskine Faush and Dr. Horace Huntley. We're presently at the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute. Today is November 18, 1998.
I was talking to her last night. It just, you start talking about one thing and move over in this direction. Being careful, you continue to do too much.
Reverend Faush, I'd like to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to come and talk with me today. And welcome to the Institute.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
We'd like to just start by asking some general questions about background. Were you born in Birmingham?
Oh, yes.
In Birmingham.
Born in Birmingham.
Were your parents originally from Birmingham?
No, it's my understanding that my mother was born in Selma, Alabama, and my father in Montgomery.
Okay. How many siblings?
Three.
Three. Were you the oldest?
No, the youngest of three.
Oh,
yes,
baby.
one sister and one brother.
What part of town did you live in? Did you grow up in?
Grew up primarily, my earliest recollection is Eden Ridge. However, I'm told that I was born in a house, a double-tenant house, that was on a place called Kirkland Avenue. I don't think it exists today, but it's in that border area that was taken by the freeway that came through 11th Avenue, that sort of border between Smith, what you refer to as Smithfield, and Eden Ridge, yes, at the border of Fountain Heights.
Okay.
Because if you go 2 blocks further, you would have gone in that section, then occupied by whites in Birmingham, and then down to the area that blacks occupied.
Right. Yeah, and relatives that lived up in Eden Ridge, up on 5th Place.
Yes,
So it's right
yes,
there,
yes.
freeway.
Right. Some
In
of
fact, we can still see 5th Place from the freeway you pass.
Absolutely.
That's where it's cut off.
Right. Those streets had names at the time. The one either adjacent to the one that you mentioned was called, as I remember, Baltimore Street.
Okay.
Yeah, Baltimore Street.
That takes it way back.
And 11th Avenue, and that was before the Northern Memorial Presbyterian Church moved to its present location. All were displaced. And I also remember that was a mecca for business too. I remember as a child, a candy kitchen, a black home, candy factory that was on 11th Avenue North.
Is that right?
Yes.
Wow. That's something that we've lost.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You could smell it, of course, halfway to town.
It was attractive.
Yes.
Yeah. In that area, let me ask you this about your parents' education. How much education did they have?
As near as I can recall from conversation, my mother went to Snow Hill Institute. She referred to it often. Just how far she went, I don't know. But she was, her side of the family that came out of the Selma area was very much a part of the history of that area. I remember my grandfather, Peter, that's the Thomas family. Her maiden name was Alberta Thomas. And the Thomas family was quite well known in that area. In fact, she was the only girl, had 3 brothers. One was Willie Thomas, who owned at the time, the only black cleaners that was on that main street. I think it's, I can't recall, it may come to me later. But it's the main street where you go up through the Edmund Pettus Bridge, downtown.
Maybe Highway 80.
Yes, but there's another name for it that escapes me at the moment.
Right.
And then there was her brother George, who owned a small grocery store and was also a preacher. The most prominent of the Thomas family at the time was Mark Thomas. And he owned most of the land around Range Street and First Avenue. In fact, if you visit the area now, The building still stands because his widow still lives. She's 106 or 7 years old or something like that. Laura, yeah, she still lives. And there's the name engraved in the stone at the top of that building now that says Thomas Grocery. They also leased a lot of land. He was a cattle trader and raised a lot of cattle out of a place outside of Selma called Beloit. The family, I've been into the family cemetery, and there are Thomases that date back into the early 1800s. At the time of Mark's death, the thing that he would not let them tell, and it was told at his funeral. I have the funeral program somewhere at home, and part of the recording from it. But most of the civil rights leaders were there at his funeral because, as you know, during the height of the civil rights struggle in the area, they tried to cut off the food supply. And Mark had gone into retirement, and it is he who came out of retirement and started what is called a co-op grocery. They knew what they wanted to do, but they didn't have the expertise, and they got Mark. But Mark was a person also who paid the fines for a lot of the demonstrators that was jailed at the time. However, he was not permitted to be told at the funeral. All of this came out. And quite a story. His, there's some still in the area now, a lot of Thomases.
Are the businesses still?
No, most of the things on First Avenue, they're still a part of their property, but being leased. Service stations and other things are still leasing land off of the Thomases, even today. It's come down generations. But as I mentioned, Aunt Laura still lives, and until her demise, of course, and the other generations of heirs, it won't come into play. However, two very well-known persons in the area that still live, the Mosses, one of the Thomas daughters married the Mosses. Ottilia Moss, who was an outstanding educator in the area, was just funeralized last year. She died. She was daughter ruler of the Elks of the state of Alabama, in addition to educational involvement. And the other two are twins, Malcolm and Mamie Thomas. Malcolm Thomas are first cousins. Malcolm owns a high-tech industry, engineering in Huntsville, Alabama at the moment. His wife is Dr. Maddie Thomas, who's on the faculty at A&M. The other one, Mamie, who was ran PXs and so forth in military service at Maxwell Air Force Base in Selma. But all the way involved in business enterprises and things of this kind that side of the family.
So you come from a long line of entrepreneurs.
Yes. And in fact, there is a funeral home in Selma today that connected with, and also a hotel that Ottilia and her husband, Moss, that operate in the city of Selma today. So it's been a long life.
Yes.
By contrast, my father, that side of the family was from Montgomery. And my father would tell me the story of when I would inquire as to what he did, with line of work and so forth. And I remember him telling me the story of the Drummond Motor Company, the Cadillac dealer and so forth for many years on the south side of Birmingham. But they sold buggies, horseless carriages before the oncoming in prominence of the automobile. And he was a painter that did the specialty painting on carriages and things of that kind. I remember finding a bunch of a case once as a child with all kind of small jars of specialty glistening paints and things of this kind with a lot of thin brushes, and asking him about it. And he told me the story of how he would, a man would come in, of course, and order a new carriage and that sort of thing, and he could design what he wanted on it. whether it was a family crest or whatever and so forth. And he was the person who did that. In later years, I remember he worked as a janitor at school. In fact, when I was in elementary school, he worked as a janitor. He also worked as, and they refer to, I don't know how they got the title called it that, because when you say porter, you think of the railroad, but they called them porters, people cleaned up the floors. And he worked at Black's department store.
Did your mother work outside of the home?
No, only when it became absolutely necessary. By being the youngest of the three children and so forth, my father, in my early years, became ill. And he was ill for a long time before his death. And so that necessitated my mother doing whatever she could to supplement and keep the family going. So I remember she took in ironing. She ironed shirts and things of that kind. She worked, I heard her say once she worked at a laundry someplace. It used to be on the south side of Birmingham. And, but no, she was more or less a housewife and did these jobs with necessity, demanded that somebody do something, and she became, a major breadwinner as such for the family. It was always amazing that my mother could, again, with such limited resources, seem to be able to, that's a look back at that's a lot of human thought as well too. She was always frugal, to say the least, quite thrifty, and instilled in the children that, and yet, if mother only made a dime, she saved a penny of it. She was never broke, never had much, but she was never broke. She knew where she could go to that jar inside the closet or somewhere and get a few nickels when necessary. And I was always thinking she was an amazing cook, an outstanding cook. And I told some people in recent times that humorously, of course, that my mother could make the best gravy in the world. I was 12 years old before I knew that a chicken had anything but feet.
That's right.
I thought there was all to it.
Yes.
And but she'd bring in these big bags of chicken feet and make the best gravy
What do
with
they
the
do
rice.
with feet now?
I don't know.
Chicken foot, I don't know when, but yeah, that's what we
You know, I think that today perhaps people today, the younger generation today perhaps, I don't know if they've ever been able to never seen a live chicken.
Not many of them have not,
Yeah.
you're right.
And perhaps they may have had the same notion as I had about the feet that was all to them, that perhaps they all come in the world that way. They're all in cellophane packed in the butcher's case.
That's right.
But
That's right. Now, you grew up in that Enon Ridge, Smithfield area. What school did you start first grade?
first grade Tuggle, but I went to Beulah Day Nursery.
Okay.
She was quite a figure. And over there, Miss Beulah Moore. And Miss Beulah Moore's Day Nursery. The building, I don't know if it's still there because it's been a long time since I've been in the area. But as you know, at Tuggle School, Mrs. Tuggle, of course, her grave site is in the yard of the school, and it perhaps remains that today. Sardis Baptist Church is on the corner. Well, there is a building. It finally moved from wherever it was prior to the Beulah Day Nursery sat on that westernmost end of Tuggle School, right across the street from Old Sardis Baptist Church. And there was a grocery store that was across the street also called Bell Grocery. We used to go and buy candy and stuff like that when I was in elementary school. But I went to day nursery first. And which propelled me to getting out of school more quickly than would be normal. Because not waiting until age 6 to get in, I was not quite 5. but having gone to Miss Buellamo's day nursery, there was almost a sort of automatic movement on into the first grade. And so I got in before I'd be 6 years of age.
So you were ahead of yourself.
Yeah, I was ahead of the time, more or less, and so forth. But we lived on I can remember after moving from, my earliest recollection of a house was we lived next at the end of the ball field at Tuggle School, which was right down there. And so much is coming to my mind right now because across the fence was the family and relatives of Erskine Hawkins. The Henderson, were later became Henderson Sneeds and those persons, but they were sisters. And I'm trying to remember the early blues singer, Laura Washington. Okay. Laura's family was in that area as well.
Right.
But we lived at the end of the house next to the grocery store, which was at the end of the playing field, a ball field that was on the campus at Tuggle School. In fact, my father got his eye knocked out in a ball game. The two of us were walking. He was holding my hand as a child, walking past the ball field. The catcher missed the ball. My daddy wore glasses and hit his glasses, and he lost one of his eyes. Yeah, he got a glass eye after that. But and then from there, I can remember living on 4th Street, which was called College Street. And there's a Jewish cemetery down near the bottom of the hill. And across the street lives Dr. E.W. Taggart. And we were directly across, right up the hill in an old, huge double-tinted house that sometimes we only occupied the lower floor. And on the weekends, a church would come in upstairs, which I can remember they had church upstairs.
Right.
Yeah, but there are a lot of people, well-known people of that time, lived in the area.
Yeah.
Across the street, Dr. E.W. Taggart was a well-known dentist, black dentist. And up the hill, across the street from us, lived Dr. Hutchison. In fact, he was a black physician. He and his family lived there, right either one or two doors from Sardis Baptist Church. And in fact, his son, Edward Hutchinson, was in my class in elementary school at Trumbull. And around from us, right around the corner, living on the next street, was the Early Harris family of Davenport Harris.
So that community then was basically a middle class community, or was it a mixed?
Sort of a mixed bag. You'd have these one or two houses, like Dr. Haggart's house, which perhaps was the most outstanding, and the other one would have been Dr. Hutchinson. Directly across the street, I forgot I had a cousin who lived directly across the street, the Howards, who lived next to Bell's store. And, but between that, you'd have double-tenant houses.
Right. Okay.
You know, that was.
So it was a mixed bag.
It was a mixed bag, yes.
Right. Working class people. What did most people do? What kind of work did most people that lived in the community do?
Various odd jobs, whatever was available during the time.
Did you have any?
But you've got to remember also that as you start up 3rd Street North, and this was all in that same general geographic configuration. That was that mecca of black business enterprise that also bordered the black community.
Right.
Part right down the street from what they referred to in later years as Sugar Hill. And as you know, Center Street was a dividing line of demarcation, if you please. It became Dynamite Hill and Center Street. So, but over on 3rd Street, on the other side, which would have been the southernmost side of the Jewish cemetery, where the railroad would come through. Right beside that was the Ice House and the courtyard owned by the Commons family.
In the community, it sounds as if the community basically almost is self-sufficient.
Almost self-contained, yes.
And that's interesting because I guess at that particular time, it was almost necessary.
Oh, absolutely necessary. Absolutely necessary.
Now, what do you remember about Total School?
There are a lot of things, of course, come to mind.
Is there anything that just stand out?
Yeah, the community feeling, the extended family feeling and association that was perhaps, for the want of a better term, an emotional and psychological connection. Everybody knew everybody. There was what I like to refer to again as to what community really means. And it can be, you can transfer that to mean a caring, sharing responsibility. You knew your neighbor knew you. You knew all the children, their history. There was a sharing of not only resource, but information, again, of caring and concern to the extent in what has been described as weeping with those who weep, of laughing with those who laugh, and so forth. But you shared each other's tragedies, each other's joys, the hopes and fulfillment. And it was somebody out of the neighborhood who made good. And there was a rejoicing, not only when your kid walked across to get his diploma, but they all made it.
It was the epitome of the extended family.
Absolutely.
Because
I mentioned about 11th Avenue and the Candy Kitchen. I remember on the next corner, the principal of Tuggle School lived. His name was Bert Hudson. And Mr. Hudson always taught his seniors. He had some of us, and it was a great thrill if you were selected as one of the persons who worked in the office.
Right.
And he'd select different students to work in the office. And I was fortunate enough to be selected as one of those who worked in Mr. Hudson's office. And we'd have, assignments of carrying notices around the school, different things and so forth. But you had some exposure over and above the student-teacher relationship.
Right.
And Mr. Hudson always taught his seniors, and this stands out to me perhaps more than any single thing in my elementary school career. He was a lover of literature. And he always taught his seniors 1 hour a day, and it was all about literature.
So not only did he select you to work in the office, he actually instructed you.
Yes.
And he selected these individuals that he instructed.
Well, what I'm saying is, these are two things. The persons who worked in the office were people he selected, of course. Either you were good students, your attitude, and whatever other criteria he put in his selection process. But it also meant that you were missing some of your recreational time because you still had to do your classes. Nothing replaced doing your class, you do your work. But if you want to work out of the office, the one perk that you got was that whenever they had a movie, instead of an assembly period, sometimes that was a movie. that had the auditorium. And if so, you at least got a chance to go to the movie free. You didn't pay the nickel to go to the movie. That's really all about the real perk that you got, for working. But you got to know we didn't have intercom systems and all of that communication. And the campus was, it's a hilly area up there. And it was a long way when you had to get down to the shops area or the two-story building, as we would call it, or some other part of the campus.
Right.
And if you needed to, if that was a meeting or faculty, if you wanted to see somebody or leave them in the office or whatever, if that was an emergency at a home, for instance, and a call had been made to the school, you had to find a student or whatever the case may be, somebody had to do that running. And you'll find those people and get up to the office site, transmit information. So you were a courier, and as well as other things that you did around the office. Now, but on that period, instead of a study period, when you got to be a senior, Mr. Hudson taught that class. You had to go to Mr. Hudson's class. And he taught literature. I never shall forget that when I got to high school and started literature classes and so forth, those of us who came out of Tuggle were so much further advanced because Mr. Hudson had already exposed us to American literature and some English literature.
Wow.
And at the time, we would watch other kids out playing ball. We could see the ball field, and we were sitting in there going, the literature I couldn't appreciate at the time. And those long nights in trying to memorize the moving atom and many other things that come to my mind. But when we got to high school,
Then you understood.
I understood and appreciated the fact that, hey, we were so much further ahead. Wow, it was a breeze to get through it.
Right. Did you, when you left Tuggle, where did you go?
Parker.
To Parker.
Went to they had annex there.
Okay, you went to Park Annex first.
Parker Annex first.
Right.
Yes. I had beautiful music. I started my musical experience and training very, very early as well, too, because my first band teacher at Tuggle was Amos Gordon.
Ah, is that right?
Yes. And is, of course, who's made such a mark himself, and Hall of Famer and all of this. To be under his tutelage was a great advantage at that time. Of course, I couldn't even appreciate that at the time, but later on appreciate it. But he developed me. And of course, at the time I went to high school, as you know, Parker was the only high school, the largest high school in the world.
Wow.
And you'd have the annex, of course, here. But because of Mr. Gordon's influence, and I had private classes with him and so forth, which put me ahead of, theoretically, of the music.
What was your instrument?
Started out with percussions and then moved on to the winds and had a brief time with the strings, but primarily I was a percussionist and the winds, reeds and brass were my specialties at the time. Later got into keyboards as I got into choral music and so forth. But his teaching opened the way for me because when I got to the annex, the band was so large at Parker at the time that they had a junior band and a senior band. And no ninth grade is it was just too full. You just didn't get it and so forth. But we do believe because that he had made contact with Mr. Hudson and went down and auditioned. And I got in the band, in the Parker band, as a ninth grader. So I spent 4 years in the band, along about the middle ways and so forth, again, because of that foundational training that I got earlier. Mr. Hudson took private students on Tuesday and Fridays, and I was one of his teachers. I taught his private students along with him on Tuesdays and Fridays, which was very helpful because we had no money, and I got 50 cents for staying after school to help teach the private students and got a chance to play. That exposed me to a world of things because then I got a chance to play with the jazz band, and Fitz Watley was there at the time and so forth, and I played in the head Mr. Hudson would select about 10 students, what he called the auditorium band. The school was so large until you had to have alternate days for auditorium or assembly period. You had a junior and a senior You had either ninth, junior, ninth, senior, were just in the ninth grade, or 10th, junior, senior, and so forth. So the juniors would come, all the junior classes would come on like Monday, Tuesday, it would be the senior sections of those classes, and it would alternate that way. And I got a chance to play in the auditorium band. And it also, they had the outstanding variety shows. I got a chance to play in the orchestra. This is, in later years, this is the only thing that helped me to make money and to keep going, because I'm playing in jazz bands and other things and so forth.
So that was an intricate part of your development.
Oh, no question about it. Yes. And I became, with Mr. Henry, I was in the choir, and became student director of the choir, senior year, and student director of the band. And one of the few students ever, as in high school, that would travel each year with the Elks band. The Elks were the organization, fraternal organization for blacks. They had the big conventions and parades. The trains would come through the whole state of Alabama, and the bands would go and compete, with Chicago, Cincinnati, and other places. I had a chance to be exposed to all of that, play in those bands. I got a chance to play with such people as Fess Watley, the Clarks, Amos Gordon, and I got a chance to, I remember once, Lionel Hampton came to town, and of course, the only way you could, or the best mechanism to get information about, where could you get a captive audience of thousands of students, and so they accepted Parker High School, okay? So when a celebrity would come to town at your assembly period, they'd bring them to Parker High School, okay? I saw many of them, Dr. Mordecai Johnson, just all kind of names come to mind that I was able to see
Right there at Parker.
right at Parker High School, you see. And of course, the choir was just famous all over the world. I got a chance to meet Wings Over Jordan, Dr. Glenn Settles, to have our choir. I was in the choir that sang on the Wings Over Jordan CBS National Hookup. And we went all kinds of places, and everybody had to come. You just had to hear that choir under William S. Henry at Parker High School. So they brought all these people there. So Hamp came to town, and Melvin Caswell, who played drums with Fess Watley's orchestra, was ill and so forth. When he came, and he didn't have his drumming, and he needed somebody to sit in at the old Birmingham Theater downtown, where he was having the concert that night. And Mr. Caswell said, "Well, look, I got a student out here, and so forth. I think he's good. Yeah, you appreciate it." So I got a chance to meet him and to play with him at the Birmingham Theater. And that was an experience that I'll never forget. It also became, as a senior, they had then each year what was known as the academic meet. And you'd meet and have this academic contest, and of course, you win scholarships to various schools and so forth. Well, I took the academic meet. Something else just comes to mind and so forth. Also, one of my very strong subjects was chemistry. And my chemistry teacher was Carlton Wells, Mr. Carlton Wells, and recently. But he was also, in addition to teaching chemistry, he was one of the coaches in athletics. And it got to the point that when he had to be out with athletics and so forth, I taught his chemistry class and so forth. So he was pushing me. And this is what I appreciate so much, those teachers who took an interest in me. And when the academic meet came, Mr. Hudson and Mr. Henry wanted me to take it in music. And Mr. Wells wanted me to take it in chemistry. So I took both. And while I did not win the top prize, and here 40 years later, I can remember the girl's name who beat me. It was a girl named Mary Elizabeth Weaver from Asheville, North Carolina. She had a score of 99.8. I had a score of 99.5. She beat me by 3/10.
Where was this held?
And we were at, now that you asked me that, I think we did it at the school at Park, I believe. I think we go somewhere else. That escapes me. I can almost visualize being in the room
Right.
with the test sheets and all
So
of this.
this was a national test, a national.
I don't know really how far it extended beyond the boundaries of Alabama. That part eludes me at the moment.
Did you say she's from Asheville? North
This
Carolina?
girl was from Asheville, North Carolina, and I don't know if it was administered. It would not. What I think happened is I think they administered the academic meet in various sections of the country, but not all coming together.
Oh, I see.
Because they probably hold it in the state of Alabama and say, and this is what I'm surmising, because this girl was from Asheville, North Carolina. I remember getting a letter from then Dean Cater at Talladega College. Mr. R.C. Johnson was principal of Parker High School at the time. And Dean Cater's letter came to me saying, while we know you are disappointed in not being whether your score was so high until we want to offer you a, whatever it was, $250, $300 scholarship to attend Talladega College next year. They sent a copy to Mr. Johnson. Mr. Johnson's alma mater was Talladega. He came from Talladega. And he came in the class. I never said anything to him about it. But when he came into the class and called me out.
This was the principal.
Yes, and said he'd gotten this letter from Dean Cater and so forth. And he was excited because it was the first time a Parker student had won something from his school, Talladega.
Is that right?
And he was excited. He went there marching me around the school, and all this kind of stuff. But a strange thing happened. They sent me, and I was excited too. I was excited because they thought it was such a big deal, And so I had tentatively said that I was going to Talladega in the fall. Set off the application, all this sort of stuff. And that was the year I'd gone off also that summer to another Elks convention to play in the marching band, which won first place. I know we got off the train playing Tuxedo Junction. But anyway, he won first place in the national parade. When I got back home, and incidentally, I have to add, because it's connected to some other things, they would pay us like $5 a day or something like that. The band, there was a stipend, some kind of so forth. It wasn't much, but it was something. But it was important to me because I didn't have anything. And the guys was, being out of town and so forth, they'd have fun and all this kind of stuff. So I'll see you those little things. Okay. I passed a shop on the corner, and that was when the first time a lapelless jacket came out. It was corduroy, brown corduroy lapelless jacket. And I took my money, except $4. I had $4 to show up again, and bought this jacket. It was the only new jacket because I knew I was going off to school in the fall. And my only chance to get a jacket was to get this one. And I took it, and it was a prized possession, because nobody buy me anything or whatever the case may be. Anyway, when I got back off the trip and so forth, the letter was there approving my application for attendance at Talladega College. But, and I don't remember the figure, but I needed to send some, I don't know if it was $40, $25, whatever the amount was for lab fees or something that it said. My God, that was it, man. Yeah, I didn't have it. All right. But I was too proud to tell anybody. But Daddy was sick. I didn't know where to get any money from. So time was getting close to go to school and so forth. And I know they went back down the park, went by the school and so forth. And I finally told Mr. Hudson. He asked me, he said, well, you money and so forth. And I just kind of, anyway, finally, he kept pushing me. So I finally told him, I said, I just couldn't. I wasn't going to Talladega, but I got this letter when I got back and so forth. I don't have the money it takes, so I might just sit out. He said, what? Can't do that? He said, wait a minute. So he called his friend, Jonathan Ford, who was newly appointed bandmaster at A&M. He talked to Ford, had him come, he was in town for it, come down that afternoon and met. So he said, look, this is one of my best students. Do something. You'll have it out there. They were looking for musicians and so forth. And I said, man, you'll be one of the best I've ever produced if you will do something. So he said, well, you get your stuff together. And I said, I'm going on back. And you just get your stuff together and come on up. And I said, well, look, I came by nothing. I ain't got nothing. No books. No. He said, I'll take care of it. You just show up. You get back. So in the meantime, I said, okay. Everything I had was owned in the world was in a Foot Locker. An old one that my daddy had, so a little Foot Locker. Got my little stuff together, got on a Trailways bus. Got off in Huntsville, Alabama. Well, Huntsville then, the school is 4 miles outside of Huntsville at Normal, Alabama. Wasn't developed like it is today, brother. That 4 miles was woods and that one little ribbon. Oh, it was a country. Okay. There were 4 guys on the bus with me. And when I got off with my Foot Locker and so forth and got down and so forth, they saw me coming. And they asked me about, well, when was I going up to school and so forth. I said, yeah. And so I later found an upperclassman. One guy, tall guy, I remember because I saw him, months later there on the campus and so forth, but he was a senior. But anyway, they said that they supposed to be the guy with a car and so forth and all that. I could go up with them and so, but I'd have to help buy gas and that kind of thing. So anyway, make a long story short, they swindled me out of my $4, give me my $4. Man, I'm just 16 years, 17 years old,
$4 bought a lot of gas doing that.
But anyway, I didn't hardly know what to do, first time being away from home, my own right and so forth, They could tell I was young, that paddle was still on my chin. Anyway, I stood around that bus station looking for them and they never did show up anymore. And I was left there. I had to get out on the road and do one of these numbers. So from somebody after I almost walked to the school with that Foot Locker, stopped and gave me had a pity and picked me up and took one up to school. Okay. But when I got there, I couldn't find Mr. Ford. And the folk down in the registrar's office didn't know nothing about me. Never heard my name. Okay? So here I was now with that Foot Locker. They done got my $4. Now I'm sitting up there.
All you had was a Foot Locker, some clothes, and no money.
Nothing. And up there, but fortunately, at that time, probably 60% or maybe even more of the students on A&M's campus came out of Birmingham. And many of them I had played in the band with and so forth. Compton Russell was up there. Just a bunch of folk. I mentioned him because he's a well-known musician and principal in setting, Willie Smith, and all those folk. Sergeant, people that I had known, And somebody, I don't know if it was Tom or somebody, let me stay in their room that night. The next day, I did find Mr. Ford and so forth, But you talk about hunger, hole and all that and so on. But now let me just tell you this before I move on, before I leave those. A few years ago, there's a big plaque in the middle of my office wall down there, and it says, the mayor, city council, all signed by these people and so forth, making me an honorary citizen of Huntsville, Alabama.
It's all right.
This was presented just a few years back at the Von Braun Center in Huntsville, where I spoke to a group of physicists and engineers and so forth who was there, and all the faculty from A&M at a special occasion there in the city of Huntsville. That night I said, if there was ever any doubt in anybody's mind that there is an eternal force that has control of our destiny, I want to remove that speculation from your mind now. And I told them this story of the first time I saw Huntsville, Alabama, with that footlocker, with everything I had in mind. I say, and to have you invite me here to this Von Braun Center and to speak to you on such an occasion as this. I said, you could never understand the significance. You know, so anyway, I share that with you because to me that was quite the impact on my own life.
How long were you at A&M?
Stayed at A&M most of that first year. But during that year, what was happening is well, I was coming home on weekends. I was singing. They paid me $15 to sing on the early Bradford program. I used to come from Bradford Fuel Hall on Sunday morning. And I'd come back when I got a spot with them. I was singing with a group called, it was John Banks, who was director of music at Lawson State, and in the group with them. And it became an alternate thing for the Sunday mornings in the Bradford program, who was on the Bradford Singers and so forth. And John just gave me $15, and so I'd come home on the weekend and to get those $15.
You said Lawson State. Now, Lawson State.
Well, it wasn't Lawson State.
We're going
Technical trade school.
Yeah.
That's right. That is right. And but anyway.
Then you became, that was part of that, I know in Birmingham, the tradition of quartets.
Yeah, but this was in Syria. Also, well, on Sunday mornings, those were hymns of the church and that sort of thing, as opposed to gospel music as such. Now, it's strange with that musical connection because I was in everything but gospel as such. I became the pastor of the church I was born in for 20 and a half years. And the first person that was indigenous to ever pastor that 112-year-old church. Metropolitan. But I was a child of the church.
Is that right?
Yeah, and stayed that long as pastor than anybody else ever been there. But anyway, so I said that in connection with what I'm talking about musically now because I came out of the early Methodist tradition. And most of the things that we did in church musically and so forth were the canticles of the church, great hymns, the serious music that came out of early Wesleyan traditions that did not necessarily include a broad application of traditional African American music.
Right.
Okay? All right.
Now, fascinating. Now, you were at A&M. You came here every Sunday to make the $15. That was big money.
Oh, yes, sir.
That's big money.
Yeah.
So did that then change the direction that you were going?
Yes.
What happened
Yes.
after that?
All right. One of the things that happened, my brother, William, then opened this radio station in Bessemer called WBCO. WBCO was owned, and I mentioned some of this along the way because it has a connection with the continuing story. William was there for about a year at the station. And I mentioned, started to say that the three people who owned that radio station at the time, one was later became the mayor of the city of Bessemer, which was Jess Lanier, who served many years into his death. The second person was Elton B. Stevens, the Elton B. Stevens of Freeway fame and EBSCO fame. The third person was the late federal judge Ewing. Three of them on the radio station. Okay. And my brother who was different from what was common for Black broadcasters at the time to take an assumed name. And a name that may be applied to them by somebody else, like Jeffy Jazz or Daddy O or Sugar Papa or some other name. My brother used his own name, Faush. So in the short periods of time and being in early broadcasting and exposure for, and was something new and novel for Blacks at the time, he became known by his name. So with the promotional pieces, they put out fans, one of the function stores that put out fans and all this, and the Faush, so well, my brother left, decided to leave Birmingham, go to universities.
Where did you go?
He went to Louisville at the time, I think.
In radio?
Yeah, he was the LOK, I think it was. LOU. I think it was. But in the meantime, they had invested in promotional pieces and other things. And the name Faush, well, Faush was our name. It wasn't something they dreamed up, as a handle or moniker, for entertainment purposes. And so somebody said, well, he's got a brother. And a guy by the name of Hal Fulton, who was then assistant manager of the Justin Mills, they sent him to ask me if I'd come out and do this.
And that's the way you get.
And so I very reluctantly agreed to go and do that because I wanted to do something else. And anyway, I made a deal with them that I would try, if they permit me, to continue to go to school or do whatever it is I wanted to do. Well, I early perceived that the advantage was with me at the moment. Even though they were white, I started bothering it early to say that, hey, you're asking me now. Didn't take.
I'm in the driver's seat. You need me.
Yeah, it didn't take a Rhodes Scholar to figure out that they were seeking me at the moment. Right. So I bet he seized this moment. And while salary-wise, it was a big deal to make $25. I think I started with $25 a week, whatever case may be. But I also played at night with orchestras and things like that. So we had a little band and so forth that would play little gigs. But also then I got involved in this gospel music and stuff and so forth. And I got into the music when the music started getting to me. And also, I started looking at this thing and saying that I saw some potential, even though it was nothing at the moment. And it was in its embryonic stage at the moment. And so what I also could perceive, I'm going to learn something about this, So this summer I stopped in because they were having this and Jesselyn and Stevenson had connections, and so they could get me in. But they had this first big seminar that was going to go to the University of Denver. And I made a deal, with them to get because and the thing was at the time, because I couldn't go in Birmingham, in Alabama. You see, they had a broadcast journalism school at the University of Alabama. They had other places and so forth. And but we couldn't go. So well now. But they do have these things that I need. And if I'm gonna be, good for you and help you make money, you got to fix me where I know what I'm doing. So it became a good argument. I never let it be perceived by them that it's going to enrich me.
Right.
It's going to enrich them.
Right.
And they better make the investment and so forth. So this is how I got off and get some broadcast training and so forth. So I had to put my general studies on hold at the moment to do this because it can make work. work, go out there, come back, and so forth. So
Right.
then they got this investment in me and all this other thing.
Mhm.
And then also I started then to, and with the music, to promote it and that sort of thing.
Mhm.
I also saw the fact that if it's going to be a commodity that you've got to, it's got to be a vehicle, either to, whether it's sold as entertainment on a radio station, for whatever purposes, this is the commodity.
Right.
You know, that you've got to be involved in and so forth. So it's in the interest that also you gotta promote it and stimulate it otherwise. So I started bringing the artists in, that sort of thing. And for more than 18 to 20 years and so forth, it became an exploded and so forth. I did all the promotions here in Birmingham as well as in the entire Southeast musically for about 18, 20 years. Nothing moved without had some connection with it. Plus I became A&R, artist and repertoire director for several record companies and so forth. I even got into recording myself. I made about 4 or 5, and I'll show you some of the books and things and so forth. Reached the top 10 in the country back during those times. Yeah.
At what point did you get into the ministry?
And this was in the minister came, and I'm sure you have reference to the ordained ministry because I had perceived ministry in an overall sense and all the things that I've done. But even prior to that, I started getting into the promotions and so forth. But I also felt the need to be able to somewhat control your own destiny to the extent that whether or not it made money, there had to be some kind of self-gratification in being able to step outside of someone else always determining the direction of your career or anything else. I wanted to be in charge. And I guess that's from, if I were in the percussion section, I wanted to be first drummer. If I'm in the brass section, I want to be first drummer. And at least make the attempt and make the effort to do it.
Yes.
So, and several things developed from a social standpoint, and I guess I've probably always been a rebel rouser to a certain extent. Perhaps not as vocal as some others, but in my own way, moving hopefully as growth does. It's very silent. You don't hear much from it and so forth, but that very force will crack concrete. And a plant will come up through its roots if it gets the right nurturing and so forth. And that force can come up even sometimes with more impact than it can if there's avoid the significant or advanced notice that it's coming.
Right.
So, and I thought that the preparation and other things, my own cornfield definition of luck is when preparation and opportunity meet each other. And you can be prepared and never get the opportunity, it won't work. You can have the opportunity and you're not prepared. It's going down the drain. So trying to, hopefully that one day some of these things will happen. So I started off, I had a grocery business. I saw the need. I opened the first Black amusement park. Went through all kind of traumas with those things, but each was an outgrowth of the other in almost like steps coming on top of each other. So, and then you mentioned the ministry. But in promotion of the music and other things and so forth, that became times of public presentation and so forth. And I think perhaps always that's been that innate desire and all sometimes preparing, leading toward you know not what. And I think perhaps that became the highest expression to perhaps put all of formulating entities that come together and sort of gel to say, in this, the impact of the music, the business, entertainment, and all of this can come together and perhaps have its highest form of expression in this setting. And I felt the energy and movement. And then, of course, when I got in, I was called to the ministry and so forth. And again, like the broadcast and so forth, I recognized the fact also one has to also prepare himself. If you want to do something, you ought to that discipline, to at least make the preparation, or you will never achieve its highest potential. I heard somewhere sometime one of my old cornfield cliches is that, people who know how to get the job, but people who know why will come there most. So I wanted to know some of the whys of the things. So again, I found myself back in school and so forth. Of course, when Faith opened and so forth, I went back to get the undergraduate courses and so forth. So
Where was that?
Faith College. After the grad, so when we came out today, Payne closed and so forth, and I moved in and finished up the undergraduate courses. But at the same time, I was in theological training with ITC, Denominational Theological Center, who then had their extension at Miles and so forth. So I was in all of this all at the same time. But aside from that, I was involved in all kinds of community things, because I always felt that you owe something to the community. And if something's going to nurture you, you owe something in whatever it is that you're involved in, to move it along. And of course, we were then in the early stages of the thrust for human rights, and all of this stuff was seething and burning in all of us. And just, I suppose, all waiting for some kind of direction and some kind of glue, as such, a cohesive force to come together, like a magnet to pull it together to give it direction. So, but we were always fighting our own wars and so forth, even in broadcasting, and that's a whole story in itself, and other things being white owned, and the many fights and battles we fought with advertisers, who in many instances you feel is taking advantage of the Black community, who's just taken from it, giving nothing back to it. As I said, that is a whole, we could write another book about all of that and the struggles and the things.
And it needs to be written.
So, but here I've got all these hats going.
So how do you fit all of this together particularly as to how you eventually relate to your activities during the early and mid-60s?
In the thrust for human rights and how it all got. As I said, I think all of us, it was like a sleeping giant, or an animal, if you please, who's laying there and just waiting and so forth. It's almost, and you didn't have to hear thunder. If you could imagine a sleeping bear lying in the woods and so forth, and a hunter's step on a dry twig, that's really all it took, or you've got escaping gas. All it needs is the pilot light as such, and once you light that pilot, you light the whole up, the whole stove, you see. And all of these things, the pressures had been there, the restlessness, all of it, just waiting for direction.
What gave you this direction?
I think a lot of things. I don't know if I could identify I don't know if I can identify any single situation. It's sort of like if one is to identify your personality, to know me now or to know you or any individual at this point in their life and development, there's no way you can understand them, because at any given point in time, all of us become the cumulative total of life's experiences that brings us to where we are. To understand the way I think without knowing something of my cultural background and heritage, and those things that had an impact to make me think the way I think today, you cannot really understand that thought process, which is why history is so vital and so important, and those things that bring us to that point in time. One would have to have experienced some of the indignities.
Assume that I understand some of those indignities.
All right.
And try to explain to me why at this particular time is Birmingham ready for what would take place in the 60s.
All right. One must understand though, like I said, sometimes we focus in on a certain given point in time to say, boom, it started. Okay.
Yeah.
That would not be correct.
Absolutely.
In my way of thinking.
Absolutely.
I said there are many things. It was like the leaven in bread. When we see the demonstrations and the outward expressions, this is only that point, perhaps, where it all came together. But the leaven had been working, And for instance, when the demonstration started, we often forget about the Alabama Christian Movement, the other organizations and the meetings, when one says, if one would take the point of the Emancipation Proclamation, for instance, and decide, hey, this is the time, boom, they're free. And one would have to go down long before that. You got to go back to the ships, and you got to go back to those who slaved down there, and those who had hopes in their hearts, and those who nurtured and carried that desire for freedom and so forth. And when all of the environmental things got to the point where it's like a boil, if that boil gets to the point where that bacterial information comes and collects all in one place, something has to give at that moment, you see. And it just so happened, and I think that is divine hand, and you can call it what you want to. But I think that and many have postulated, why do you think the divine hand, by whatever name you want to refer to the deity and the one who is the creative force behind this universe, say that, well, why is it always, or why is that force seem to be identified on the side of the oppressed? I don't give an answer to that. This is one of those things conceptually like love. Love is not defined, it's evident. And whether we trace the course of history as far back as we are able to do so, there have been times when one would have to attribute it to divine force, if no more from the reason or the lack of being able to explain it otherwise. But it all comes together. And there is a point in time, and if the universe operates by order, and certainly it does, whether you want to give a name to that force that created the order is there, the intelligence is there. Nothing just happens. Something or somebody makes it happen. And that force, by whatever name you want to give it, I call it God. But if you want to call it something else and so forth, by any other name, still that creative force, I think, brings in due season, just as the bud becomes a rose. I think that all the other things that make up the universe and society comes to a fruition. when something takes place, that creative energy has to have expression. And I think all the things in our history that was coming together, all these times, I have no explanation why you take a Texas-born senator and a vowed segregationist and all the things that will constitute even the side issues that one of that discipline would think. His geographical background, his political background, and nurturing everything else coming up under Rayburn. Right. And would also that at a certain given point in time that even, never would have been elected to the high office of President of the United States except for the quirk of history that removed a liberal person. And who could have ever thought a Kennedy and a Johnson from these two opposite political poles would ever come together to form the leadership of this nation at that given point in time? Why would all that happen? And then his subsequent assassination, and then this Texas-born person with all of his background would be the very person who would have to be in the seat to push and sign the most far-reaching civil rights legislation in this nation's history. Who can explain that? Yeah. And anybody who's a serious student, I think, would conclude, had Kennedy stayed there, there is a serious question as to whether or not he would have had the power and what it would take to get it through the legislature, no matter what he thought. Mm-hmm. Who can explain a Hugo Black, a Ku Klux Klan was sitting on a Supreme Court and yet be the person, the instrument by which some things are done? Who can explain things like this? It defies logic. So I'm saying that this creative force brought all of these things to the point. And it has never been done without suffering. I don't understand why there's no redemption without the shedding of the blood. I only know it's a fact. So.
Yes. In some place, the Bible says, as we have said, God helps those that help themselves. And He's always prepared to do whatever is necessary.
Absolutely.
As long as we are doing what is necessary.
Absolutely.
And it appears that, if you look at that period from, many times we talk about the civil rights movement, we only started in 1954. Of course, you have to do more than that.
Absolutely. Right.
But if we talk about the modern civil rights movement, 1954 Brown versus Boyd and Montgomery versus
yes.
you start to see
yes.
activities taking place, although much is taking place prior to that.
Absolutely.
It's just not publicized.
It's like a farmer preparing the soil.
Right. And it all then comes into play.
Yes.
And we're not through yet.
Oh, no. Oh, no. No, sir. No, by no means. No, we've only seen the door crack.
Yes.
We have yet to push it fully open and to walk through.
Tell me, how did you and Shelley come together eventually as partners? I know you were together at Williams, is that right?
Yes. Well, there was a time when, of course, we were on other stations. We go back to those early years, and from each vantage point that each had was engaged in various actions and involvements from different points. That was it's like the guy, I suppose, who builds a fire over there. And, he hasn't got a stove, but then got some wood in the backyard. So this may have a match, another may have a lighter, but in some way, that a fire needs to be started. And but in the meantime, and there have been few, this is the casualties in the broadcast industry, the casualty rate is high. There are very few who last over long periods of time. That in itself is somewhat of an accomplishment to simply last. And that's also even by design, because it's like gaining a foothold. And those who have the controlling strings in the first place don't want anybody to get enough clout of any kind that they may even have notions of self-reliance. Forget about the resource, but even the notion. All of these things, the same things that you find in any other discipline, were certainly prominent. It was as simple as someone coming in and you're gone, someone in your seat tomorrow morning. Just that fast, you see. There are a lot of movement even today. If you notice, you might see a face on television or in the news department tonight and so forth, and there's even no explanation as to what happened to them. They just gone. You may see a new crew in that next week, and it's hanging on the ratings and what someone else says is popular. We just saw our thing in the newspaper the other day and so forth as being as the impact that Oprah has today. I think you saw the other day where the local outlet is talking about giving it. I mean, that's almost unthinkable. But
Tell us, say something about that so that people will know what you're referring to.
Well, the local outlet that airs the Oprah Winfrey Show has reported that they decided not to renew carrying that show past the term or expiration of the present contract, I think, which ends in '99. Having supposedly picked up by someone else, but that's almost unthinkable at this point in time. But if that can happen to a top-rated show, and I don't need to elaborate, just saying Oprah is enough to elaborate on her status as an entertainer and entrepreneur and everything else that you could possibly name. Number one female performer in the history of television. And they're taking to that. Oprah, what do you think about the kid who just fresh out of journalism school, waving a diploma, waiting to get on, to be an anchor.
That's right.
So,
That's right.
anyway, but getting to the matter of Shelley and myself, of course, we did not come together in terms of partnership and ownership on this, except that both of us had obviously the same notion, and so how best to get into ownership. You see, it's different with the broadcast industry, perhaps, and I think it's probably the most regulated industry in the world. You can't just decide that you're going to open another grocery store, department store, mechanic shop, or automobile dealership, or anything else. It's a long, hard process. First of all, you got to find an existing frequency, or the possibility of, once the band is full, no more frequencies are available. You've got to either buy an existing one or, you can decide to open one. There are all the technical things involved, and that's much too broad a subject to even begin to explore in these brief moments. But aside from meeting all of the regular things that any other business enterprise must meet in terms of taxes and regulations, in terms of local, state, government taxes, and all the usual things of investment but there's also the FCC to deal with as well, along with the other agencies that get into the picture, like the EEOC and Labor Department, and the list goes on and on, the technical things. Once you got past all of that, then of course there is the money. And it has to be a viable and practical situation. But it so happened that some years back that we wound up on the same station. I was WENN. You know the story of that. That's a whole other discussion too. But just for the sake of sequential explanation, I guess, the WBCO I mentioned earlier, after it was sold to the McClendon Group, which came out of Mississippi, who were one of the first group operators or attended group operators, wanted to increase the power and move to Birmingham into the larger market arena. And being restricted on 1450, which is the frequency it was on at the time. But it also got a CP from the Federal Communication Commission, that is construction permit from them, yet it had not expanded its power. And it could not be done on that particular frequencies. There are limitations, whether your pattern, that is your broadcast coverage area, is known as directional or non-directional. If it's directional, it goes in not in a completely even circular configuration of emissions from the tower. But what it does, it has sort of a shaped type, which means that it may go 50 miles this way, 100 miles away, and so forth. And that is done and regulated by the FCC so that you would not have overlapping signals in some instances. Like, for instance, now, as an example, we're broadcasting on what is known as the Mexican Clear, which is 900 in the center of the dial. That is a treaty between the United States and Mexico that exists, that keep one from overlapping the other, and so forth. So that power of stations located on that frequency in Mexico has to be controlled by the Mexican government, and the United States government, by treaty, controls the ones broadcasting that frequency this way, so that you would not have them collide and have a jumbled mess of emissions that would confuse the signal and so forth. That's an oversimplification of a.
Let me ask this,
Yes.
the 900, this 900 frequencies, it is the middle of the dial, right?
Yet in the center, yes, and it's known because of that treaty that exists. That's not true for some other frequencies. There's one other that is called Canadian Clear, where there are two treaties that now in existence that on the AM band that by treaty those things are controlled, and 900 happens to be one of them. But the advantage is, and so forth, that is a non-directional signal. It's sort of like squeezing, if you had to have a conduit or a pipe that you were going to get water through and so forth. Depending on the diameter of that pipe, and so no matter what the lead-in comes to it, so it depends on, to a certain extent, what is going to come out, figuring pressure, resistance, and the other factors that go in that control it as to how much you're going to get on the other end as it comes out this end, which means in some instances, it is considered a very good dial position. If you'll notice, all around the country, most of the lower frequencies were taken by those who were in broadcasting earlier. Most of your black program stations are higher on the dial, anywhere from 12 to 13 to 14 and more up to 16 some of them, none down at the lower end. That's because those are considered the better frequencies. Powers do not have to be as high. You can get more non-directional signals, which means that you can take, if you were using an automobile engine, for instance, as a yardstick to measure by, in later years, they can get as much thrust and horsepower out of a 4 to 6 cylinder engine, which uses less gas to propel that car off as you used to get out of a big straight 8 that burned a whole lot more gas. So efficiency and other things is related to what I'm saying. But anyway, we sort of, while we wound up, as I said, to simplify it, somewhat complicated
Right.
situation. We wound up on the same station. Without going into some of the other side stories. And here we are. And I had made an attempt to buy another station earlier and so forth. And that's a real story that, as I said, I won't revive, not get into that. But there was, at the time, that I will say this about the earlier situation. I was in a position at the time that, fortunately, no other blacks in the stations were in. I was assistant general manager of the station. It gave me access to a lot of the financial information and so forth about the operation of the station. It was because of that information that I carried that information to some people to say that this is the time to strike, we need to do this and so forth.
And that was your position?
I carried, yes. Yeah, one of these days I'd like to show you through my personal files at home. It's related to a lot of things that you wouldn't imagine. But anyway, when I carried it to them, they looked at it and said, God, persons were in other enterprises, but what I showed them on paper exceeded anything else that they were in. They just didn't know that there was that much money in broadcasting. I said, yeah, they don't want you to know it now. But I showed it to them in black and white. I carried it to them. And the only way I could get my hands on that is because of the position I enjoyed in the station at the time.
Right.
Well, it went on from there. And in fact, it looked so lucrative at the time and so forth. We wound up on the short end of the stick and somebody else got the thing. But anyway, but the desire for ownership and all that was still there.
But you had learned that, and of course, I'm sure your appetite had been whet prior to this.
Oh, yes.
And with that kind of information, that will of course lead you to say, well, this has to happen.
Oh, yes. Yeah, you gotta keep going because, the old story, they say, Colonel Sanders was turned down 300 times.
That's right.
That's what the story says.
And
On the time 301,
that's the only one.
it's history now.
That's the only one that counts.
What you say?
Look, I know we have a long story to tell,
Yeah.
and we're not going to have time to do that today.
Yeah.
But I, really appreciate you taking time out. But I know I need to sit down with you again.
Yeah, because there's some other things that internal social things that the involvement from the church and other struggles and so forth. And I've served on the advisory board of the Governor's Economic Advisory Board. There's some things inside there about channeling money to black banks and other things and so forth that very, very few, if any, know anything about. I built housing development, but I wound back up in graduate school, back up to A&M in 1977 in graduate school in order to be able to compete and to provide homes for people who otherwise would not have. There's one out in Woodlawn that bears my name, that the church kind of put my name on as a tribute for the work that was done in it. But there are a few people who know that I chaired the Central Committee of the entire denomination of the Amy Zion Church for the oldest Southerner and for 2 quadrillions. I would serve for my nomination to the National Council of Churches as a representative. There are just so many things that,
It'll take us
Yeah,
years.
but it's-
we need to do.
and that by, at this time, out of all the difficult, then wind up again out of graduate school again, over to Alabama State. And finally got a graduate degree from there, and been cited by more than 200 institutions, as well as the White House in this country. But those are things that are not published,
Yeah,
and not necessarily, I'm just sharing with you, but only in the context that it has a relationship that of things and something that happened here. There were early statues out there in that park and so forth. And for those whoever cares to go around and look at things, so back with Ruth Jackson and others and so forth, the Ellsbury Park thing. I mean, it was on that statue that said, I don't know where it's in there.
I don't know.
You know, you remember the Julius Ellsbury thing in the Franklin way back there and so whatever they did, they used to sit out there someplace.
Yeah, it's set right out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't know where.
I don't know whether they moved it somewhere, I understand, when they got rid of the park and so forth. But how long that went out there was the Martin's thing. The wall in Birmingham, that's for the development of the Civic Center. So the first production ever held in the Birmingham Justice Civic Center, I had. Yeah.
We need to know all that. Have you started doing any writing? Autobiographical?
Haven't had the time. I've been one of those, and that's unfortunate. But I've got such a collection of things at home now, for instance, that's just piled up. It's hadn't even been sorted and pictures and stuff that, and aside from, I guess I'm glad that Smithsonian finally decided to take it upon themselves to do something, about the park that, even in the civil rights struggle and so forth, about the communication strength and so forth that we had with that.
No, we need to talk consistently because
I appreciate it. Yeah, because
I
I'm hopeful that in some way, perhaps, something may ignite some young person somewhere to see the need to, or at least inspire them because of the difficulty and struggle they've had and having, that they don't give up, that they keep on shoving forward to do something.
I think that they'll do that based upon what you are doing and have done,